The following conversation with Rosa Barba took place on Manhattan's West Side on March 31st, 2022. Rosa Barba is a Sicilian-born, Berlin-based artist who works with cinema as both a medium and a muse. Her kinetic architectural installations feature both film projections and equipment, presenting imagery from scientific disciplines and cultural archives as both random data and poetry. You grew up in Sicily, which is seems to me like a very particular place. And does it relate to your interest you have in desert landscapes? I see a lot of that sort of carried through in the work.
Yeah, I guess it has for sure something to do with that as well. But this kind of further or longer interest that I developed with deserts was actually when I spent time in the United States. From 2006 onwards, I was researching the Mojave Desert. I encountered the Center of Land Use Interpretation, and I was very fascinated by these ideas of how modernity is kind of inscribed in nature and how we can read this as an archival note and that I developed further and further from there. But yeah.
I mean, desert landscapes in particular, they're almost like a blank slate for writing, right? They have tracks and, gouges and evidence of things that happen there. It's interesting to me, though, that the film is your medium, and it's not just something you use as something to document. It's also like an object, the film projectors.
I like to take them apart and refigure them and make them do other things that they were supposed originally to do. And I'm using them like a sculptural material. And I, from very early on when I started to work with film, I was interested to work very spatially with it and to not hide the apparatus, so to let it be part of this kind of choreography and stage and in this kind of larger exhibitions when I have the opportunity to show several works in a space. And I also like to choreograph the temporality of them and when they switch on and off and play with them also in a sort of musical way. Yeah.
There's so many choices within the film, industry, let's call it, but to choose to do what you do, which is to kind of very empirically look at the equipment itself, like what it is in a basic sense, like what materials it's made of and all of that. I wonder if you watch like documentary films, do you have a tolerance for documentary films in a way because of the sort of the ways in which those films kind of control your ideas? I mean, they're very kind of manipulative in certain ways, even though counter to what they're supposed to be doing, they're supposed to be kind of, documenting in an objective sense what's going on in the world.
I look at documentaries, but I guess I'm much more inspired by writings, by literature, by observations in any kind of form, and I take those as documents or source material from what I then derive my kind of, the films from that I'm interested to research. My work aggregates state of matters, for example, that I worked on between 2017 and 19 that I shot in Peru, that I researched the Peruvian landscape, the melting of the glaciers, the second largest desert there, the largest, it has still the largest population of a native community, so I was interested to go in there and research and find out what does all this transformation that we are living through, maybe can we learn something going in a space like that where the landscape is so reinforced, and also maybe can we learn something from these communities that are so close living to these changes, and then like an inspiration to that rather comes from writings than from watching documentaries or something. But of course there is always a documentary aspect in my work. I start to unfold facts, but maybe in a different way, how I use my camera, and how I try to get into a space with these people that I meet. And then, but more and more, I'm offering a sort of fictional layer where I like ask or invite these people to come with me on board. Yeah, it starts maybe like a documentary and then it moves into this kind of fiction.
It's totally connected. But sometimes you feel that there's one or two or kind of more things going on over there.
You're kind of revealing the artifice of the activity in a way, right? Instead of it being like cinema verite where someone's just trying to document what's going on as if they're not there. Of course, anyone watching knows that the filmmaker is present, but you're sort of bringing that to the surface as a form of artifice in the work. But I think it's interesting. I mean, I toy with this idea all the time. With so many problems in the world, you ask yourself, I'm an art historian, I can do projects with artists, or I can write about the problems in the world, but what can I really do? And sometimes I ask myself, would I be more effective if I was a journalist, or would I be more effective if I took some more literal form? But make a case for sort of the nonlinear, or like an installation that you walk through, the visitor walks through, that gives them a way to think about something that's going on maybe in a different way.
I mean, of course, especially in this kind of climate we live, you ask yourself all the time, how can you move in it, or make a point, or maybe reveal something? Or I think for me it is important to kind of offer these other thinking spaces that have been more and more removed from us, from all the political climate, but also the way media forces us to use language very quickly, or also use images in a very quick way. So everything is kind of already digested or seen or read for you. And how can we have this freedoms as freedom as artists, or to offer this other thinking space and use different kind of ways to get there. And that's what I'm trying with my films, how to use language in a way, and the sound, and how to work with these documents and people in a way that we could maybe look at things in a different way than we are supposed now every day to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I think about it, do you think that art galleries and museums are kind of the last slow spaces there are? I mean, if you go to a movie, or if you go into almost any entertainment space, let's say, and here in this country, art is classified as entertainment, but you'll get a program that'll be very quick, and basically it directs your thinking. You're there with the drama of the film or whatever is going on, but there's museums do, and galleries do, offer a chance to just kind of wander through and to spend as much time. There's no script, like you're not supposed to be there for a certain duration. It's not meant to be navigated in a certain way. You can sort of, and your installations feel to me particularly that way, like the one you did in Germany in the Mies van der Rohe building. That feels to me like almost a kind of like a technological forest in some ways of modern technologies.
It was also a way to have many film works live in one space and turn on and off in different times, and have the visitor be very active, involved in the kind of experience of what a film can be. And it can be a text that is written on celluloid by a typewriter, but it can be a projected cinema format screen, and it can be like a work of mine where I collaborated with the drummer Chet Taylor, where the drum kit, like the different frequencies of his drum kit, are activating shutter systems that are sitting in front of the film projectors, and so that was also part of this installation. So it is always changing perspective and views, and really actively engaging with the space and with the different works.
It seems to me that it's sort of embodying cinema, because what you described in the beginning about, in a normal cinematic experience, all the equipment is hidden, but you're really showing it as kind of materiality as bodies, as something your own body is in relation to, right? Which is something we are kind of getting away from in our digital age and our screen time and all of that. All of that, it just feels like everything is so abstract in certain ways. I think people do forget. I watch people walk out on 10th Avenue looking at their phones, and it's almost as if they forget that they live in a body that is a fragile thing. But I think maybe it's kind of experience that reminds you of your body and maybe the sort of technological effects created by things that we don't see behind the hood for anymore.
I'm also interested in this, there is the sound element of the machine that also functions like a sort of activation that is kind of renew a sort of transport system to enter the film, and which it's like it works together. It's this kind of being transported into the narrative, or if there isn't a narrative, into whatever means and what a narrative can be, but like a device for it. Yeah.
We have so few experiences now where our bodies do feel transported in our minds as well. But I do feel the culture is seeking that kind of experience, some immersive installation experience. In the Whitney Biennial just opened. It's full of lots of video installation screens in different sizes, and I guess I'm just I'm probing my way into thinking about how people are familiar with this kind of engagement, but on the other hand, it's shaped differently and it's organized differently. And I'd be interested in hearing what the curators or you had to say about like what all this video art means all of a sudden in a biennial such as the Whitneys.
I mean, it wasn't surprising to me to see so much video and film. I think we have seen that already in documentas and other biennials, and I hope people more and more take the time to engage with longer time forms.
Any theories though? I mean, I have theories sometimes about like why there's so much abstraction, or why there's so much photography, or why there's so much figurative painting like at different times. Did it strike you as relating to the kind of mood of the moment in any significant way?
I guess some works, of course, felt like they were made during the pandemic, where maybe time also works in a different way, where so maybe you have then more time to think something out, or use a medium that is more time consuming, and maybe that has something to do with it as well.
Rosa Barba's show at Luring Augustine, New York, closed on May 21st. An exhibition of her work opens at Esther Schipper Gallery in Berlin, Germany in September 2022, and at Tate Modern, London in February 2023. The following conversation with M. Rooney took place on Manhattan's West Side on May 3rd, 2022. M. Rooney is an artist who combines photography and sculpture, freighting her amorphous objects with personal and political associations. Her latest work, fantastical steel and papier-mâché sculptures based on the life cycle of butterflies, stages a Baroque dialogue between femininity and masculinity and the natural and man-made worlds. I would describe your work, the aesthetic of your work, as being sort of like industrial Baroque. Where does that sensibility come from?
I think it comes from a lot of different places, and those places remain kind of parallel to each other, but like move in different directions over time. So when I was young and I first started making art for real, probably when I was 16 years old, like I was a troubled teen, and so my mother like forced me into extracurricular things.
Like art therapy.
Yes. So I took a sculpture class at a community center, and then I also made photographs at a community center. And I think that when I really started making art and thinking of myself as an artist in earnest when I was in college, there was like always this feeling that I had that was like that a photograph in and of itself isn't enough. Like,
Right.
I felt like I had to prove myself artistically in a way that I didn't ever think a photograph would. It was just too frail and didn't require enough like exertion. And so I think like the starting point for that is sort of like, I think a common starting place for a lot of artists, which is about like self-competition and like the desire to prove one's artistry to oneself.
Photography itself has like a defense complex. I mean, it's
Totally.
always sort of like not enough unless you give it a lot of context. Sometimes the context can be a caption. I mean, that kind of weighs it or weights it in a way. But, you know, other things you do, like adding frames to it. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. My professor at Hampshire, his name was Robert Seidel. He died in 2011. He was a poet and a collage artist, and he taught photography, but really from the place of like Dada and collage. And so I think my style and my sensibility really developed from his, which was very much about like bookmaking and the handheld and the image-word relationship. And in some ways I think that it comes from like a feminist tradition also. Like I think that Robert was a feminist. I didn't really have context for that when he was my professor. I don't think he maybe contextualized himself that way,
Right.
but he just was. And eventually, you know, what I learned from him like bled into a kind of like feminist maker tradition that I was exposed to more after college when I lived in San Francisco.
What's interesting about people adopting these other techniques or materials with photography is that with the photograph, you still have this like piece of realism you have to deal with in some way. And do you think about how we conceive of realism? I mean, do you think of that in terms of what we expect a photograph to do, in terms of memory and sentimentality and those kinds of things?
I don't think about it in relationship to realism in regards to my own work. I think about it in relationship to realism like historically or academically when I'm like contextualizing work for my students, and we, you know, talk about like truth and, you know, those types of things that like come up a lot. I see myself and my work more aligned almost with like pictures generation artists and thinking about the image as a signifier or the image that's like mimetic to an earlier generation of images. Sort of, I don't know, like thinking about Stephen Shore, thinking about, you know, even older
Gary Winogrand.
Yeah. And then thinking about like Sherry Levine doing August Sander and thinking about like appropriative photographic acts. And then maybe there's this like triangulation that's happening where I feel like I can do that appropriative work and also let there be like a point exterior to it that's personal without having the work be just personal or just appropriative.
Yeah, no, I read something today about, you know, you said you love Moira Davies' work, I love Moira Davies' work, but that your students, it just didn't come across. It's highly conceptual, but it's also fairly banal. The academics like to write about it, and they can spin in all kinds of ways talking about it, but she herself is just very straightforward about that. And I wonder, are their minds simply not developed enough to understand all those sort of layers of concept in Moira Davies, or are they wanting something more immediate, something more obvious from photography?
I'm often reflecting on like my relationship to work and their relationship to work. It like comes up all the time, you know. Of course I show them things that I maybe don't personally love because they're important for their education. But generally, you know, like I'm showing them work that's guided by my own interests. And so, you know, this conversation ends up being about art that's about art. And that is really like a hard line for my students. And I don't necessarily think it explicitly has to do with like brain development, but maybe with dedication and how dedication evolves over time, right?
And figuring out the world and maybe having interests such as, and especially now, it's sort of as if nothing that doesn't relate in some obvious way to the political and social scene seems frivolous.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. I was just showing my students this this book that Sable Elise Smith made with Cal Siegel. It's a text, and they're using the L's and the R's to guide a sort of walking tour of their respective places and taking quick snapshots at every corner. And the book goes forward to backward and meets in the middle. My students were fixated on how the photos were bad, and also why do fancy artists, because I contextualize Sable's in the Biennale, Sable's in the Biennial.
Yes, right.
Why do fancy artists take these bad photos, and then they're pretending like they're not fancy. And so it's like I had to do this whole breakaway moment that didn't have anything to do with what we were talking about to contextualize the semi-restricted life of an artist, or the complex life of an artist, that like you can come from a certain class background, exist in a certain class strata, and still travel to the Venice Biennale, and that like this idea of the like blown up artist is a very like 1% type of thing. It's like that as though every artist is Richard Prince or something,
Well, let's reset and get back to your own work in a certain way. Your show that's up now at Derosia is Entrance of Butterfly, right? But this idea of metamorphosis, I think, is something you're thinking about as like a general concept right now in this particular political moment. Can you articulate some of that?
There's like the concepts that guide the work, and then there's how do you make the work feel like something when you're making it. And for me, especially with sculpture and maybe less with photographs, always needs to be connected to a real lived experience.
You said this incredible thing in this art forum piece, this one paragraph that I highlighted, where it was like you like the messiness of nature, but also the sort of, there's a kind of system to it or something, and you related that then to your personal life, and then you brought it around to politics in this very like shocking way. But I think that that's like an outlook on the world. Is there a better way to explain that?
Every time I give an artist talk, I'm trying to like outline and make connections between the themes in the work, because there's a personal aspect of it that runs through it, but I feel like more and more only insofar as I think about myself as like a political body.
And we all are, so
and everyone is, yeah, exactly. But I do think that systems and change and metamorphosis are recurrent interests, and maybe they all have to do with sort of mortality and the systems that affect mortality. So already I'm like thinking about my next show, and I live in this not really post-industrial but more actually industrial town, and I'm already thinking about the next show really being about this space, and how will I go from thinking about like costumes and the Baroque and femininity and womanhood and pictured womanhood more specifically to like looking at this town and looking at the industry and what is that transition. But it's really all about the like overarching systems of oppression and their representations in culture, and my relationship to their representations in culture. And so it's like once you have this framework and you sort of know how you move within it, you can connect anything to anything, really.
Because today the Supreme Court is basically reversing Roe v. Wade. I think we should acknowledge that just by seeing if there's anything to talk about other than our extreme disgust.
I wondered if you would bring it up. I woke up this morning and I could tell that my partner was in a bad mood, and I was like, what are you in a bad mood about? And he was like, oh, the death of, Roe v. Wade. And I opened up the paper, skimmed the headlines. I felt like I've known that this has been coming, and I closed the paper back up and like refused to engage with it for the rest of the day. And then when I was driving from my house to here, I was driving through Amenia. It's a very small upstate town, and there was a group of boomer-aged women holding signs on the corner and like holding hangers, and I felt so upset. It was like it immediately hit me full force, especially because of their age.
It's an affluent part of Dutchess County in upstate. These are people who witnessed that fight earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The protesters made me emotional, but like what the deeper feeling was is like I wish for the time and space to like really personally act.
Getting back to students, one last question. Students, though, they're in the metamorphosis stage and they maybe have other perspectives on what's going on. I mean, it's going to be in their lap anyway, but, you know, is that one of our best hopes anyway?
You're catching me on a hard day. Asking me that question.
It's a lot to put on kids, and it's a very romantic idea that there is some hope because they're going to, you know, clean up the mess.
My students, I feel like they feel a lot of pressure, and I see them being really weighted down by the world. But then I have like a 5-year-old niece and a 7-year-old nephew, and it's almost like that's what I feel really hopeful about. Like I'm hoping that these kids will somehow get out okay, but that really the younger ones might be supported by that slightly older generation. But I see them, it's not that I'm not hopeful for them, but I'm worried for them. And I think that's the primary feeling.
Rooney's exhibition, Entrance of Butterfly, closed on May 14th at Derosia Gallery in New York City. Her work is currently featured in the New England Triennial at the de Cordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and at Im Labor Gallery in Tokyo, Japan.